I'm Karen White Porter, and an author, educator, and here's Dr. Martha Watts, who's also an author and educator and literacy specialist in Brevard County Schools. And we want to welcome our two featured guests, Gilly Segal and Kimberly Jones, to the Sunshine State Book Festival virtually here in Gainesville. Martha, can you tell us a little bit more about Gilly and Kimberly?
Hi, so Gilly and Kimberly are New York Times best-selling youth adult authors of the book I Am Not Dying With You Tonight. They are also the nominee of the 2020 NAACP Image Award. And Kimberly and Gilly, we are so delighted to have you this year. And so I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves. We can begin with Gilly. You start off and just tell our audience about you and just who you are.
Sure. So I'm Gilly. I co-authored this book with Kim. I'm originally from the Sunshine State, so I am especially excited to be here. I grew up in the Palm Harbor area, and I went to Tarpon Springs High, go Spongers. And after that, I lived in Israel for 7 years before I moved back to Atlanta for law school, and I went to Emory Law School, and I am still a practicing attorney. I'm the chief legal officer for an advertising agency here in Atlanta, and I also write books.
Awesome. Thank you. Kimberly, let's hear you.
My name is Kimberly Jones. I co-authored this book with Gilly Segal. I also co-authored a second book with Gilly Segal called Why We Fly, which will be out in fall of 2021. I am a filmmaker by trade. I currently have an overall TV deal with Warner Brothers, so I'm making new TV shows with them. And I am the mom of a 14-year-old brilliant boy who thinks I'm not that smart.
I'm not surprised. Their parents are. That's how it is.
I have a 16-year-old girl right now.
So you understand.
Yes.
We all have teenagers. We get it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm the oldest. It seems like my son is 31.
Oh,
no, he likes you again. He thinks you're brilliant again.
You're cool. Now he realizes you actually know what you're talking about.
Yeah, now he's a fan of yours.
I'm looking forward to that day.
Me too. So, I have a 13-year-old who routinely is like, "Ugh, Mom, you're not cool. Stop it."
But at 31, he's circled back to now where he's like, Mom, I get it. I understand what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. You're right. Very, very right. Yep.
Mm-hmm. You know, I want my daughter to read your book because it moved me so much, because your presentation of your 2 points of view of the two young women, it clearly depicts that you can be in the same place having a completely different interpretation of reality. Can you tell us how you guys work together to set the scene and personally build each character?
You want to start?
Sure. So first of all, thank you. I love hearing that. We like to say the book is as much about perspective as it is about everything else. And so it means a lot when readers pick up on the differences in their perspective. So as for how we wrote together, we started working on this book in 2015. It was inspired by real events that occurred in Baltimore in the wake of the murder of Freddie Gray. And we started working on the book, each of us primarily taking responsibility for one of the characters. In early drafts, Lena was primarily written by Kim and Campbell was primarily written by me. And their voices are very different. Their lived experiences that bring them to this night are very different. And it was important to us that they sound and act that way on the page. But rather quickly, we realized that because the girls interact throughout the night and appear in each other's chapters, that we needed to sit side by side. And it was best for us to sit side by side and talk about it and write it together in order to have the voices be consistent throughout and for continuity of plot.
Beautiful.
So we started writing side by side, like literally in the same room. We used to get together at my house on Friday mornings back when people went into each other's houses before COVID. And I would make us breakfast and we would write together.
I miss her making me breakfast on Friday mornings. And I miss going there because she is the only person, including myself, who knows how to make my coffee the way I like it. So I have not had my coffee right since she and I haven't been able to have our Friday morning sessions.
Oh,
I miss it too.
Yeah.
Good. So I'm just intrigued about the title. How did you all finalize that? I am not dying with you tonight. How did you all make up your mind to just say this is going to be the title? I mean, I struggle with titles by myself,
Mhm.
let alone two people coming up with a title. How did that happen?
Well, let me just say for the record, we are horrific at titles. We do not get titles right at all. This I'm Not Dying with You Tonight is the third title for this book. It originally, when we first started writing it, was called The Neighborhood because we wanted the neighborhood. We thought of the neighborhood as the third character. And so we called it The Neighborhood, and we knew we wanted to paint a specific picture of that neighborhood. And that was the first title. And then Gilly, as part of our research, we went to talk to different people. And one of the people that Gilly spent time with was a SWAT team there in Florida, to talk to us about how riots move and how SWAT moves within them and how ones would go to the place. They actually fixed a lot of plot holes for us and said, this doesn't make sense. The character Marcus was born out of that conversation that Gilly had with one of the SWAT members. And so the SWAT team never refers to a riot as a riot. They refer to it as a mass disturbance, which is now a header in one section of our book, but then that was the second title. So when we sold the book, we sold it as mass disturbance, and they did all these tests on it, and it was not testing well. People thought it sounded like an adult fiction novel about, something nonfiction or a YA post-apocalyptic story. People didn't feel like, yeah, that mass disturbance was the right title for it. And so I'm Not Dying with You Tonight is a line that we wrote in the book. And our editor pulled it out and said, I think this is the title. I think this line from the book is the title. And we grappled with it for a while because we had lived with mass disturbance, because it was only the neighborhood for like a blip. It was mass disturbance for a good chunk of time through us trying to get an agent, trying to get the book sold. So we had lived with mass disturbance for years. And so now we weren't ready to let it go. And so initially we didn't like I'm Not Dying with You Tonight. We were like, I don't know.
Steve, we're sorry if you're watching.
Yeah, we're sorry, Steve, if you're watching, but you were right, Steve. You were
You're
so
right.
right. Oh, you were so right. But our editor was like, no, I think this line from the book is the title. And it tested extremely well. People thought it fit. People thought it encompassed both of the girls' stories.
Yes.
And so we conceded after we kind of visualized it on the shelf and was like, okay, if I walked past I'm Not Dying with You Tonight, I may be intrigued by what that says. And so that became the title, and it worked out, and now we love it. It grew on us and over time. But it's funny because Gilly and I really honestly think with one brain. So a lot of times people ask us questions because they're like, did you guys have, bickering or anything and trying to figure this stuff out? We use like 80% of the time we agree, which is weird to say, but it's true.
Yeah, we're pretty creatively aligned.
Yeah.
We also, the thing that we're most aligned on is we want what's best for the story and for the book. And oftentimes that meant one of the two of us was much more passionate about how it should go or what it should be. And we always followed the passion. The book was always better served for doing that rather than meeting in the middle and maybe watering down an element of the story. So when we say we're creatively aligned, that doesn't mean we always want the exact same thing, but it means we're aligned about how to get to the right thing.
Yeah, we pick a decision. We don't say, okay, let's meet in the middle. And it's like, that's going to give some like lukewarm version of whatever it is, a title or a passage or whatever. And we're like, no, let's fight and figure out what's strongest.
So do they have like a marketing, the Source Books has a marketing group that tests the title?
Sales. Yep. Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about a book once you do it for commercial publication is it's both a creative product, it's our art, but it's also a product that Source Books is selling. And so it's equal parts art and product. And the title is much more about the product part of that, to be honest, than the art part. And one of the wonderful things, like we often say we lean into one another's strengths. Kim is a former bookseller, and I remember having a conversation with her when I was like, oh, this title is so long, who's going to remember it? And she said, if I put my bookseller hat on and I think about that on a cover, on a shelf in a bookstore, it's intriguing and people will pick it up. if for no other reason than to find out like, hey, what's going on in that?
Yeah.
And so it was really wonderful to be able to lean into her bookseller experience and go, oh, there's a perspective here that's not our art, or not only our art. I don't want to suggest that titles are part of the art, but that is influenced by things beyond just the substance of the book. So
It's very well. I mean, it was a really good selection because I too think it's really intriguing because I would want to know. It could be people hiking. It could be anything.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
like I am not dying with you tonight. I'm gonna survive this night, and it's really, really, really suits very well. So
Yeah, it
good
made you
job.
think. And then when I read the book again, as I remembered thinking, oh, that's where they got the title from.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it works very well.
Yeah.
Very, very well. Nice.
Thank you.
Steve
So-
Gack, our editor at Source Books, all Steve.
That was
That's
him.
right.
That was his brilliance.
Yep.
A lot of times you hear that, oh, the people whoever, they don't help you market your books. Like sometimes if you go with certain presses, but I guess these source books did.
Oh, Sourcebooks they're brilliant marketers. Like they had so many ideas and they came in. And here's the thing that I'll say about Sourcebooks, which is why I'm I'm glad that we did this initial run with Sourcebooks, which is an indie. It's a large indie, but it is an indie. And the interesting thing about them is like they believed in this, not only just the story of the book, but they believed so much in the story of us that even initially, if I'm being fully transparent, when our sales didn't originally match expectations, we grew into the book becoming a New York Times bestseller and having the widespread attention. I think the NAACP Image Award, one of the beginning moments of us seeing a shift in our sales and seeing an increase in our sales and going towards a more successful direction. And it was like after that, then we made the New York Times bestseller list. And then there was the announcement that they would be making it into a film. And so all of that built the sales, but all of that happened nearly a year after our release.
Yep.
Yeah, it was nearly a year after our release, and we had moderate sales. We weren't like a complete failure, but we had moderate sales, but they continued, Sourcebooks, to believe in us, to promote us, to put us on the road, to come up with interesting promotions to try to get people excited about the book, because they were authentically passionate about what they felt was the importance of this story getting out into the world. And so they didn't give up on us, thank God. They didn't give up on us. And so we, it was a marathon, not a sprint, but it paid off.
Yeah. Our book festival's theme is bringing readers and writers together digitally. What message do you want to share with the digital audience out there?
The message I want to share, first of all, is that as an author who's got a book out in a pandemic, when we all made a sharp left turn into living in the digital world, thank you for your continued support. Like, we don't get to do this without people wanting to read the book and engage with it and the content that we make. So thank you. And the other thing I would say is read the things that bring you joy and interest and delight. Mm-hmm. Pick up a book that is interesting and fascinating to you, especially if you are a kid or you have a kid in your life, and a book that is going to make their eyes light up or challenge them to think hard, even if it's new and different and outside of the box of what you normally read.
I second that.
All right. So what I want to say, ladies, we see themes of relationships, trust, protection, jealousy, but there's also that misperception of race. Mm-hmm. I see the wealth divide coming in clearly through the neighborhoods, through the school, mm-hmm. and a few more pertinent universal ideas emerge and they reoccur. And I wanted to ask, how deliberate were you as you pieced that work together?
Super deliberate. Super deliberate. It was very important to us that people saw their differences and saw how being female united them despite their economic and racial differences. Because the one thing that we always say, if one of the characters were male or male presenting, there would be no book. The omnipresent threat to the feminine form is what unites them. It's what makes them connect, and it is what makes them decide to stay together. But in terms of the economic divide and the racial divide, one of the things that we did intentionally was that Campbell, the white character, is more economically disadvantaged than Lena. Her father may have that cabin, but like he's kind of like holding that together with like Scotch tape and chewing gum, kind of thing. And so this is a girl who in that moment, that economic disadvantage that she faces, particularly being a young white woman, is so humiliating to her that you have to experience that for her on the page. You have to experience that the humiliation she feels in that economic disadvantage. You know, I don't want to give away a spoiler. I don't think this gives away too much, but a lot of people like, why didn't they just call it Uber? Well, like, Lena's phone is dead, so she can't call an Uber, and Campbell has the phone, but Campbell's father doesn't have a credit card that they could put on an Uber account.
Yeah.
And so this is highlighting how we have these preconceived notions of wealth in America, that you just assume that the white girl must be economically stable, and she's not. And you assume that the Black girl is economically unstable, and Lena isn't. Her grandfather is a retired, you know, in the back of my mind, his backstory is he's a retired war veteran who had one of those really good American warehouse jobs and made a very good living and sent kids through college. And now he's raising his granddaughter and he's already paid for his home. You know, he's not a wealthy man, but he's also not in the, you know, he's not teetering on economic downfall in the way that Campbell's father is. And so, you know, that's why Lena can work a part-time job and keep all of her money, unlike LaShonda, and like spend it at boutiques. And because we wanted these girls to be nuanced in the way that they experience the world. But despite the fact that Lena has the economic advantage, she still has the cultural disadvantage of being a young Black woman in America. And so it doesn't change the fact that when you see someone make an assumption of anger or a really assumption of the person being a threat, Lena is seen as a threat and Campbell is not seen as a threat. And so we wanted to make that very clear, because Gilly and I have had really deep conversations about that, how oftentimes in the presence of what could be deemed danger, that is my biggest fear, being a large, dark-skinned, boisterous Black woman, that is instantly people see me as a threat. I am the instant perception is that there is someone threatening in the room. It's me.
Yep. When in reality, by the way, the person as between the two of us that's much more likely to pop off is me.
Yeah, I am way calmer. I have a way better handle on a pop offness than she does.
It's, you know, and that plays into how the other like they engage with the world around them in the book, right? There's one of my favorite moments in the book is when they come out of they hold up in a portable for a little while, and they come out and they're confronted with a wall of law enforcement who has descended on the school after this shooting, which is also not a spoiler. It happens early on. And Campbell's perception is like, thank goodness, help has arrived. And Lena's perception is, oh no, trouble is starting now. And it's reflective of the way that as a white presenting person, I grew up, right? The police were authority figures who were there to help me, versus the experience of much of the Black community, where the police are authoritarian figures who present as much of a danger as anything else they might encounter on the streets. And that ability to like step back outside of your own experience and say it's different for someone else, the way that these supposed authority figures engage with you and the way that that impacts your life was part of what we wanted to give kids a perspective into.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Nice.
It is all intentional, by the way, even down to the places where they come from, right? This is Lena's neighborhood. She's never lived anywhere else. Yeah. This is home. Campbell comes from Haverford, Pennsylvania, which is a predominantly white area. So she has moved from a predominantly white place to a predominantly Black neighborhood for the first time in her life. And there's nothing in this book that's autobiographical really for either of us, but that is certainly reflective of the type of area that I grew up in. I grew up in Palm Harbor, Florida, which at the time was predominantly white. And so a lot of what Campbell says and the attitudes that she reflects, first of all, she's parroting her dad to a large extent, which teenagers do as they begin to grow into their own selves. But also she is stating attitudes that are very reflective of things that I heard growing up and attitudes I knew people held in the community.
Yeah, and Lena, the same thing. We intentionally wanted Lena to have a grandfather who would have survived Jim Crow, because he would have given her a very specific view on the world. His view on the world would have been that white people are to be feared and not trusted, because he would have remembered black and white water fountains. He would have had experienced and seen in his community lynchings. He would have known what it's like to ride in the back of the bus. And so that's why we had her not raised by a parent, but by a grandparent, because we wanted the person that she would be parroting to have had a very different lived experience in terms of race relations in America.
Beautiful. I love that kind of deliberateness. And I really like the idea that Lena was reminding us, telling us about her school, about the cash register. It's not even a real cash register where she comes from. Her school has a real cash register.
The notion that you need cultural responsiveness to create a welcoming environment for your Black students, of course. But the notion that your white students don't also need cultural responsiveness.
They do not know anything about those things. These kids were sitting there like,
that is our fellow Americans. Like, those are our fellow Americans. How could you not want to understand their experience? But being friends with Kim has really taught me to open my eyes and see lots of things that before I think I would have been like, oh, whatever. And now to be like, well, wait a minute, there is a cultural element to this response. Let me interrogate myself about what I know and what I don't know, and ask the questions I need to ask so I can engage with empathy. Cultural responsiveness benefits the entire community, not just the marginalized community that you're trying to make welcome.
The white kids are the ones that need the most exposure.
Of course.
Because they live in more of a monoculture.
Well, and also because
of course,
our media has also historically presented Black culture as something lesser, right? I mean, even down to, I said this when we were off camera before, but I want Kim to tell the story of why we chose to write Lena speaking AAVE, African American Vernacular English, because white society denigrates it and chooses, oh, Kim, you have to say it. I don't want to steal your thunder.
No. We've rolled this ride together a long time.
I know, all our best lines come from each other.
Yeah, we like to always say what the other person says, because you know what? Because I'm floored by some of the things that comes out of her mouth, and I'm just like, if she's not going to say it, I need to say it, because the world needs to hear this brilliant thing. And, you know, one of the things that Gilly and I have talked about extensively, and keep in mind, Gilly and I had a lot of conversations about this because we knew we would receive some backlash for writing Lena in AAV. And we did. That was part of why we had a slow grow in our book, is because we received some really bad reviews based on the way that Lena speaks. But, you know, the way that Lena speaks is cultural, not remedial. And so, you know, we wanted to make sure that people understood that you grow up in a culture where you utilize the language that is around you, and that your palate is set by the language that is used around you, but it is no reflection of your intellect. It is no different than someone who moves here from another country with an accent. It is no different. Dr. Martha is like, I can relate.
George Bernard Shaw did it in his books, didn't he?
Yeah.
And Zora Neale Hurston. And Zora Neale Hurston, who we now exalt as one of the greatest writers of all time, she was brutalized for it. Yep. She was brutalized for it. She did not in her day receive the accolades that she received now.
After she's dead. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was after her death that people recognized the brilliance in her work. And I'm like, how is that possible? Their eyes were watching God as one of the most brilliant pieces on the shelf. Mm-hmm. And it's like, but meanwhile, you know, it's only been posthumous that she's been recognized in that way. And so I think that it is like key and critical that we're recognizing that people have these cultural markers and these cultural designs that are really just beautiful, and that we should learn about each other's culture and be able to engage in it in a way that doesn't lend itself to appropriation, but appreciation.
Yeah. Yeah, Kim, here's another thing that Kim says, and this is one of those that I'm like, we have to say it every time because it's brilliant. And it's eye-opening. Like, these are the things that make you sit down and go, oh my gosh, Black girls are the architect of cool. But when it's just Black girl culture, white society denigrates it and looks down on it. It's not until it's monetized and adopted into
mainstream society,
the mainstream society, that suddenly it's cool. I mean, down to language, right? Like I listened to white friends today talk about receipts. Oh, receipts. I'm like, do you know where that comes from though? Like, do you what you're saying lit? Why are you saying lit? You know, why are you like, there was one recently with long fingernails that someone was crediting to a TikTok star. And I was like, again, this goes back to those who are your friends who's in your home. I'm like, these were things that would get a girl criticized in school, right?
Yeah.
Hairstyles.
Yeah.
Right? Black hairstyles. You know, we see white culture. I had a friend very recently, a very dear friend, and I was glad she asked, but she said, my daughter wants to wear cornrows. And I was like, well, you have to ask yourself, am I adopting a style that would have gotten a Black person criticized or punished in school? And if the answer is yes, it's appropriation. Yeah. Not admiration, it's appropriation, because you can do it without fear of consequence. Whereas for a member of the Black community, there's going to be a social consequence to doing that. And if you can't interrogate the way that we treat Black culture until it's mainstreamed,
it's a problem.
What are we doing? Yeah,
for sure.
Wow.
Even right there in our counties, we have schools in the same counties with the same disparities. Maybe not as wide, but there are disparities in schools in the same counties, even if they're public schools too.
Yeah.
So I'm really happy for that deliberateness, if I must say. So
thank you.
And your book's important for people like my daughter. I want her to be reading books like yours. And right now, you know, they have the kids reading books like The Outsiders or To Kill a Mockingbird. And that deals with issues of like her grandparents' time. And these books, like they didn't make it to school book lists until much later. And then even now, sometimes To Kill a Mockingbird is banned in some places.
They still love to ban To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yes, they do.
I know, but it's from the 1930s.
Yeah.
And so I want her to read books like what's happening now and like your book, because it's relevant to her life. I mean, she's in band, we go to football games, and not that this would happen in our community, but, you know, the George Floyd happened and everyone saw it.
I saw the video.
And kids are just there's no dialogue in the schools for people to process it.
Yeah.
This will help.
Thank you. I really love that. I don't mean to speak for Kim, but I know I've heard her say that in the past. We are both enormous proponents of student-led reading choices. The canon is overwhelmingly cishet white male, and that is not necessarily synonymous with quality, right? What that means is at the time those books were elevated to the notion of canon, they were reflective of the people who were choosing and not necessarily reflective of society at large. And I think diversifying the canon means that it's time, and I'm not saying never read the classics, but I am saying it's time to challenge our notion of what constitutes the classics, of whether those really speak to kids at all in today's era. You know, I'm always like, you know, I don't want to get operated on according to the 1930s standards of medicine. Why would I ask my children? Why wouldn't I want literature and our study of literature and the way that our children engage with literature to evolve and change too? Yeah. So I'm a big fan of like, let students choose what they want to read, put books on the list, and they can get to some of these more challenging texts later on if they speak to them. But also, quite frankly, a lot of them have not held up. Through the lens of 2020, they are problematic. So I feel excited about the notion that we are moving past books like To Kill a Mockingbird and The Outsiders as the only books that our kids read. Again, I'm not saying don't read them. I'm just saying there is a wide world of books out there that our kids might connect with. And if you start them there, who knows where they're going to end up.
Yeah, the other thing is that, you know, it is just as important. It is very important for, you know, African-American kids to see themselves reflected on the page in books like, you know, books by people like Tiffany Jackson and Angie Thomas and Jason Reynolds and people like that, Tomi Adeyemi. But it is equally as important for kids to read stories that don't reflect their lived experience, because there's been enough, there's been enough research done to know that it helps to nurture empathy, that literature is an exceptional place to nurture empathy in people, to open up, as Gilly and I say, we like to think that our book is like a portal to difficult conversations. It can be utilized as a tool in order to open those conversations up, and people see themselves reflected on the page, good, bad, or indifferent, and they can place that conversation on the character to process it for themselves. And so they're less intimidated about processing that information for themselves. And so I think it's important that, I think it's super important that, there's an African-American girl who reads I'm Not Dying With You Tonight and sees, as we say, that hood girls can be heroes too, and champion her being the hero of her own story. But it's just as important that a kid who lives in a neighborhood like where Campbell comes from, that may not have a lived experience with people of color in her community, is able to see it on the page, experience this tale, nurture some empathy, and be given a more nuanced perspective on people who are different.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Have you ever gone into a school and talked to kids about your book, and or heard about feedback from the kids?
Yes.
Yeah, we did 2 national tours last year, and we spent a lot of that time in high schools and middle schools. And when I tell you, you talk about the people who not only did we go in and challenge them, but they challenged us. Those were some of our best conversations.
Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Ooh, it's a good one is the girls that we met at that college.
Yes, this is the best story. So he was a fun character to write. I'm not suggesting I want to date him or I want my children to date him, but I really liked Black, who is Lena's boyfriend. We went down and we talked to this group of first year writing students at Macon at the Mercer University. And I like to think that Black goes on a little bit of a journey in this book, right? You have a perception of him that's based on how Lena feels. You get a little pictures of him through the eyes of Campbell and Marcus and some of the other friends. And not a real good boyfriend, not gonna lie. But he does, I would like to say, and I won't say how, because it is a spoiler, but he ends up in a different place, making a different choice than perhaps you thought he might have. And so we tried to make that argument to these college freshmen at Mercer University, and they were like, no, ma'am. The choice that he makes at the end is about protecting himself and his music career, and not about his love for Lena or how he feels about Campbell. And it was a valid interpretation. That on the page, they were legit to interpret it that way. And we were like, oh, that's a good point. Maybe he's not journeyed quite as far as we thought he did.
Wow.
But we also were like, they're going to be fine too, right? Because I think they recognized a lot of the inherent selfishness of Black that makes him not a great friend. So I was like, y'all are going to be fine.
Yeah. And they give us so much insight into like the characters and things that we didn't even think about. It's like it's fascinating. It's
fascinating how your work takes a life of its own after.
Yes, definitely.
Here's another one of my favorite stories. So this is actually sort of very close to home. My daughter, one of her close friends, read the book and really loved it. And her mom texted me and she said, I hope it's not inappropriate to text you, but my daughter read this book. She's a white girl from suburban Atlanta. But the character that she most identified with was LaShonda. And that surprised me because I was like, oh, that's, again, sort of like, Kim and my story is on the surface, we might not seem to have all that much in common. And I was like, really, why LaShonda? And so LaShonda is a character who has lost a parent to drugs. And LaShonda never says goodbye. She says, love you later, because goodbye was the last words that her mom spoke to her. And my friend said her ex-husband had died from an opioid overdose. And Sam found herself in the story in the character of LaShonda, another character who had lost a parent to drug addiction. And I was kind of blown away because, it's what you dream, right? You dream that here's this little suburban white girl who's going to find herself and something in common with a character whose lived experience is nothing like hers. So I think that one will stay with me to my own grave.
Yeah, she told me that story, unfortunately, on a plane. And I was like,
but your characters are so packed. And
Very,
how did you get them to be so developed?
A lot of
we plot like fantasy writers, right? So we keep a character bible. We do very extensive plotting. A lot of people don't plot in the way that we do when they write contemporary, but we're like, in our world, in our mind, when we're building these stories, we feel like we're building a world no different from building, you know, Hogwarts or the Shire. We like for the environment to be a third character. And so what that does is it informs a lot of what's happening with the characters as individuals. And so it allows us to have like more nuanced, rich, and developed characters because they are both reflecting, rebelling, and, you know, reimagining their environment as part of their story.
And that's how come your motivations come out so clear in the book of each character, because you built the characters before you wrote their dialogue, I think.
Yeah, we do a ton of work before we start to actually write. We do a ton of research and plotting and character development, and we keep because we also like forget the characters. We're like, who is that? We need to look at our character bible and see like what's going on with them. We've forgotten, but we really, especially with I'm Not Dying With You Tonight, like even now, even once we get into the editorial space, like we're editing a book right now, we still, if we find relevant videos or movies or anything as it relates to the work that we're doing, we send it to each other, or when we're together, we watch it and go through it, because we always want to be making sure that we're showcasing an authentic lived human experience.
Beautiful. Very, very. How can we use your books, ladies, to talk about those hard conversations? You said difficult conversations, and I say hard conversations. I have a lot of white friends, and Karen and I can speak about hard conversations because I know what she thinks. But then sometimes, because you don't know what kind of eggshell you're stepping on, you're so careful as to what to say. So I'm saying, I think that your book can serve as a great starting point for conversations on race, social justice, and even drug overdose, those kind of things.
Yeah.
Do you share that view, of course? And if you do, what are you doing about it? What are you doing to make it happen?
We definitely think that that's what it can be. And, you know, and that's why we spend a lot of our time, even now during COVID, we've spent a lot of our times doing Zooms with entire like high school classes in order to enter into these conversations with kids, for them to use not only our book, but our relationship, our friendship, as a guide on how you can enter into these difficult conversations. Gilly and I had a safe word that we used while we were writing, and we like to share that with people, because I don't think I could have written this book with someone that I didn't already have such a close personal relationship. There has to be a level of trust to have these conversations. And so while we were writing the book, we had a safe word that we would say, okay, once you say this safe word, you're free to say whatever you need to say after that. And because it's like you said, you know, what you're saying about Karen, I know that Gilly would never intentionally do anything to harm me. And she knows the same thing about me. She knows I would never intentionally say or do anything to harm her. So we know this isn't coming from a place of harm, but more really a place of ignorance, to be honest. And so having that safe word in place allowed us to have really hard conversations about race. And I think that the other thing is honestly, and I don't know if I've ever said this publicly, I don't know if it's appropriate to say publicly, but I also think that the fact that we are a Black woman and a white woman, just the aesthetic of people seeing that, when we're on the road, when we're doing interviews, and seeing how we interact with each other and how we had this difficult conversation and wrote this very hard book to write, that we hope is the entree into people having this, just the physical aesthetic of seeing us, two moms from very different backgrounds, coming together and doing this hard thing. Like the writing process of this was doing a hard thing. We hope that that gives a guide to people to say, this is why it's important that you have a diverse friend group, not associates, Gilly often talks about if the only person of color who's ever been in your home has been there in the duty of service, that's not your friend.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? That's someone in your employ. That's not someone you can count amongst your friends list. The question is, who has put their feet under your dinner table?
Mhm.
Like, are you close enough that if you had an illness, they would bring you juice? Like, who is that person? And is your friend group diverse enough and safe enough that you can have the conversations that you need to have? And if it's not, you need to consider, I'm not saying go out and run out and get yourself like a token, Latinx friend. You should organically be open and pursuing these different relationships. And just as importantly, to the parents out there, you should be making sure you're nurturing diverse friend groups for your children,
Mhm.
so that they have people that they can have these safe conversations with.
Expose the white kids who live in the suburbs who never have that experience.
Yeah.
And be willing to talk about it. So one of the things that Kim and I say all the time is that growth comes from discomfort. And so particularly to the white community and the white community that lives a very insular white experience, get comfortable being uncomfortable. Sit with how it feels when Campbell makes stereotypical observations of Lena and Black.
Mhm.
Sit with it, right? It should make you squirm. Don't brush that aside. Don't label yourself with the badge of woke, and your good intentions are not enough. Like, really sit with it and squirm when it's uncomfortable, and back into Campbell said this thing about getting into an elevator with a Black man and clutching her bag to her stomach. Do I ever do that? We have to be willing to interrogate ourselves, because that's the only way you can change, is if you're honest. If we are honest about the difference between equality and equity, right? Like, I think sometimes, particularly if you are a person who comes from any sort of privilege, whether it's racial or religious or socioeconomic, the presumption of equality is that we all start in the same place.
That is not true.
And we don't.
We don't interrogate that understanding in yourself about where you started, because for a lot of us, it's on the 50-yard line. Like, we ran that touchdown and I worked hard for that touchdown, but I started at the 50, whereas somebody else started at the 20 and somebody else started at the
0. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Nice.
Wow. Now I have a question about, if you make this into a movie, how would you get the point of view to be illustrated, like, because they're thinking such different things? How are you going to put that into a movie?
That's a scriptwriter's problem.
Yeah, we have
Kimberly's problem.
we have a screenwriter, because we have sold the film rights. So it is.
Yes, I saw that.
So there is a screenwriter that's working on it, and we just get to kind of like sit back and read scripts and be like, oh, this is good, or I don't know about that, and then like let them figure out all the
that's one of the wonderful things about the different media, right? When people ask, like, are we sensitive about how the book gets depicted in film? I mean, I want them to do a good and respectful job, kind of, and honor the intent of the book. But on the other hand, it's such a different medium, and I by no means profess to be an expert. Kim does have a background in entertainment and screenwriting.
I saw that. Yeah.
But I would have no idea how to do that, and I'm excited to see how a screenwriter does it.
Yeah, and I would want to do this one, because I'm like, this is going to be a hard translation. I'm glad I don't have to do this.
Good. That's
Because I think
something
the book
else
really lends itself to getting in the minds of the characters.
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah. As we get more intel about the movie, and we'll let you guys know.
Good. We want to stay in touch with you. But I have one
Of course,
question.
we watch it. Go ahead. Sorry.
I want to ask you, what do you say to African American girls and white girls out there who would say, oh, Campbell doesn't represent me and Lena doesn't represent me? What do you say to these girls?
I say that's okay, because no culture is a monolith.
That's right.
That's the thing that we have to start recognizing, that no culture is a monolith. So if Lena doesn't represent you, then that's great. That means you also could use some intel in her lived experience. If Campbell doesn't represent you, that's great. That means you could also use some intel into her lived experience. And just because you're white doesn't mean you're going to connect to Campbell. And just because you're Black doesn't, like, she told the story of this young girl who is a suburban white girl who connected to LaShonda, who's a Black girl in an urban community. And so you don't have to have a stereotypical connection. And it's like, guess what? Black people not being a monolith, someone who has had an upper class Black lived experience where they probably have family members who are in the Divine Nine and they went to Jack and Jill as a child, they also need to nurture some empathy in their soul for a character like Lena. So just as much as there's a suburban white girl who needs to read this book, there is some a privileged Black girl who also needs to wash away some of the stereotypes that she would have of a girl like Lena who needs to watch to see this lived experience. And same thing with Campbell. If you're a young white girl who grew up in a very culturally diverse community and your parents are woke and you've been informed about culture and things like that, and you don't connect to someone like Campbell, you need to watch this lived experience that's unfamiliar to you so you can nurture some empathy so that if you run across a Campbell, instead of brutalizing her, you too can have a nuanced conversation and potentially give her some information that can help her grow, and you can do it in a constructive way. And so I think it's very critical that people understand that, yes, you need representation. You need to see yourself, but you also don't need to identify with every character, but it is good if you are able to process every character.
Yeah.
I like it.
I would also say the bookshelf is infinite. Our dear friend Brianna McDaniel, who's a picture book author, says that the bookshelf is infinite. There is space on it for all of the stories, for the Campbells and the Lenas. By the way, the two girls in our second book are nothing like Campbell and Lena. This is at a suburban high school, in fact, a more diverse setting. So the bookshelf has room for all of the different stories. And I hope that we are choosing to expose ourselves not only to the ones that reflect our own experience most closely, but also to the ones that really don't reflect our own experience more closely.
Yeah.
How many books? I mean, I was just looking at the Newbery Award winners. It seems like there's so many male-dominated heroes. So I mean, this is exciting to me to see that you've got heroines in it that are.
Yeah, it was
And that's
very
by
intentional.
design.
Yeah.
That
We
was
wanted to write a
design.
story about two girls and how they survived the night. It is different for them, as Kim said. I don't know that if either of these had been two boys or one, a male or male presenting, they would have had a need to team up together. The way that they interact with one another, the things that they connect over are different. And so, I mean, the other thing is the way that we talk about race and discrimination and racial violence is different sometimes for girls and for boys, right? So it was also important to us to put the story on the page of how the police perceive Lena. The poodle and the pit bull comment is really important, right? Because sometimes women get left out of that conversation.
Yeah.
And what is your hope or mission for this book? Would you like to see, what would you like to see become of this notable work?
Yeah.
We hope exactly what you said. We hope to find ourselves on reading lists at schools around the country.
Yeah.
That would be our dream.
Yeah.
Wow, this is beautiful.
I am so glad you guys said yes
I know.
to be
It is
interviewed.
our
And
pleasure.
Yes, we'd love to do
is there
it.
anything else any new projects that you're doing that you want to share with us, or any?
Our big next project is Why We Fly, our second novel together. It is not a sequel to I'm Not Dying With You Tonight, but it is kind of a companion.
Okay.
We like to say that if I'm Not Dying With You Tonight is about bringing two girls together, Why We Fly is about ripping them apart.
Ooh.
Yep. It's also about athletes and activism, which I'm really excited to talk about because that has been a very big topic this summer. And I think as we grow into an era when athletic activism or the outward markers of athletic activism that are happening now are becoming more acceptable, like taking a knee, I think it's really important that kids have a memory to reflect on and an understanding of when it wasn't acceptable and what happened to figures like Colin Kaepernick in his time, or John Carlos and Tommy Smith in their time, and the price that athletes pay. So excited to have that come out next fall and get to talk to kids about the price you pay for activism.
Wonderful.
And what is the name of the site that we can refer people to support your activism?
Oh, the People's Uprising.
The People's Uprising. Okay.
Yes.
And that's just a website, or
that is our Instagram account. We do actually have, but I am terrible at remembering the website. So let me pull up the website and I can tell you what that is. I'm like only good at the Instagram part.
And you can donate to it to help y'all with what you're
Yes.
doing? Okay.
Yeah, it's just if you Google it, it is just the People's Uprising.
Okay.
Yep.
And I wish you all the best with what you're doing and getting people out to vote. That's so exciting. And that's, it's what you're doing with your books it's like, it's all connected.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, this is my favorite thing about the world getting to see Kim in all her power now is this has always been who Kim is, right? She's got a bigger platform now, but the book and her activism, I mean, it's like along the chain of stuff she has always been doing. So I'm excited for the platform, but I'm like, she's been working on this. I'm saying it.
Do you represent
Congratulations.
people in Gilly? What kind of law do you practice?
Oh, I work for an advertising agency.
I thought you were a lawyer.
We make commercials. We make Publix commercials. That is one of our big clients that y'all would know.
Yeah.
I love
she's in-house counsel. She's like, I thought you were a lawyer. Yes, she is an attorney. She's in-house counsel at the advertising agency, but she tries to like play herself cheap in her own activism. Gilly has actively been involved in activism via her synagogue for a very long time and has worked on lots of initiatives. I have showed up to lots of events that was put together by her and people that she works with. And so this is just kind of like part of our DNA. It's just expanded into a novel.
Oh,
yeah, we like to talk about wingspan, right? Like we can all, it's the marching is important. It's incredibly important, but change happens in many different ways and in many different places. And so I always say, like, I look at my wingspan every month. What are the things, people, and places I'm going to touch and interact with? And I'm going to try to make change in one of them. A lot of times for me, it's my faith community. So I do racial justice work and other work with my synagogue a lot. And also in my own house, right? I've got three white presenting kids that I'm raising to hopefully have eyes opened sooner than mine were.
I think I went to a museum in Atlanta right next to the Puppet Museum.
Yes, the Bremen Museum.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, that's very near my synagogue too.
We went to that. Yeah.
It's amazing.
Every time my dad's in Ohio, so every time we go up through Atlanta, we stop somewhere.
Well, next time you come through, let me know, and I will take you on a tour of my actual synagogue, and I'm very proud to be part of this community. So it is our rabbi in the 1960s marched with Dr. King, and the synagogue was bombed as a result of it. The KKK bombed the synagogue, and there was lots of internal strife as well, right? Because as a community, Southern Jews have never been all that much more stable, but at first the community was really afraid to speak up and to join in the fight. And so there's sort of lots of painful history too of people wanting to put their head in the sand during the civil rights era and not speak out. So we have a lovely exhibit in my synagogue which sort of talks about the history of the civil rights movement and our connection to Ebenezer Baptist Church, which was Dr. King's.
Wow. Well, I want to see that. Yeah. How did you two originally start working together?
Yeah, we met in a book club for adults who like young adult novels and discovered that we were both writers and became friendly through the book club long before we ever started writing together. And then when the idea happened, I knew it wasn't a book I could ever write by myself. I originally had the idea, but it was not a book I ever would have attempted by myself. It's not my story to tell by myself. So I approached Kim to see if she would want to write with me.
Wow. Have you ever read, if you write young adult novels, read them, did you ever read, Maniac McGee? It's a Newbery Award-winning book.
That's Andrew Smith, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I haven't read that, although I've read some of his other stuff.
Because that book, it reminds me of Maniac McGee, except it's got all this other juicy, wonderful stuff. So,
I'll have to go check it out. I do love Andrew's work. Winger is one of my favorite books, which is another Andrew Smith.
Okay, yeah, because it reminds me of that because he's through the book he's running.
Yes.
And all through these girls are running too.
Oh yes, yeah.
It's funny. We when we were doing copy edits, one of the things that you look for is sort of repeated words and you want to make your language as rich and full as you can. And one of our most repeated words was run. And we kept going, oh, they're running again. Can we swap it for something else? But like, they're running. What are you going to do? They're running. Yeah. So is your audience primarily like young adults or is it a mixed audience?
That we're going to present this to?
Yes.
Oh, well, this will be the Sunshine State Book Festival. So you'll be on for about 6 months, you'll be on the main platform. So it's a virtual book fair.
Okay.
So it says that you're a young adult authors. And then people who want to see your whole clip can click on that.
Oh,
And then
okay.
they'll be able to see that your whole talk. And I don't know if we'll get around to doing this, but I'm hoping it'll be like an hour of discussion and of you just talking and sharing like what you just shared with me. That would be awesome to.
Yeah, happy to. We love doing that. But yeah, I was going to say, if your audience is primarily young adult, I don't tell this story, but basically it was like a drinking game. Every time, and we were like, we can't play this game because they run too much. It would be an alcohol poisoning game.
Yeah.
But I don't tell that story when we're talking directly to teenagers.
Okay.
I leave out that last part.
Oh yeah, that's good. So you were in this young adult reading book club.
Yep.
And where was the meet at Barnes and Nobles or something like that?
It was through an independent bookshop here in Decatur that's, in my opinion, one of the best young children's indies in the country. It's called Little Shop of Stories. And at the time, Kim was the Little Shop of Stories. And so, had a bunch of different book clubs, and one of them was called the Not So YA book club, and it was adults, and because we were not so YA at the time, but we all love, and I love the genre, right? I really love YA. It's predominantly what I read. And so we were in this book club, and there were a lot of people in the book club who were aspiring authors, lots of people who wrote. At various points in time, Becky Albert-Talley has been a member of this book club. Rachel Stewart Allen, who writes young adult. Who else? Mayra Cuevas was in it. Me and Kim. There's a couple of others who have since become published authors. So there's a lot of good vibes in that book club.
That's good.
Yeah, it was great. And we would go once every 3 months. We would rent a house in the North Georgia mountains, and we would go do writing retreats for like 3 days. And Kim and I got to know each other during one of those writing retreats. And this is certainly a story we can retell if you want it for the video. But
yes, definitely.
We have a lot in common, despite the fact that on the surface it might not seem that. Kim grew up originally outside Kankakee, Illinois, and then in urban Chicago. I grew up in the suburbs of the Tampa Bay area. And we, just had really kind of different backgrounds, but we discovered we have all these things in common. We are both single mothers. We are both divorced from professional athletes, which is and we were both at the time trying to balance a day job with a creative career as well. And so we were like, we sort of connected on that level of all these things that we really had in common, despite perhaps if we just passed one another on the street, never assuming that.
How did you pick Source Books as your publisher?
They picked us.
How did that happen?
Yeah, so we have an agent who submitted our book to 15 different publishers, and we got 13 no's. We love to tell the story, especially to kids, because I think a lot of times we hear the stories of instant success and easy success, and we experience
the struggle. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we experience setbacks or even failure, and I think it makes we have a real penchant in this society for easy, young, instant success, and ours was not. We were both over 40 when the book published, and it took 13 no's before we got a yes. So Source Books was one of the yeses, and we really loved the original editor who acquired the book and her kind of vision for the story. The voices in this book, in particular Lena's voice, is extremely important to both Kim and to me. Lena speaks in AAVE, African American Vernacular English, although Kim does not prefer that term, so I try to respect that. And we also really wanted a publisher that was going to protect Lena's voice. Yes. And not, Lena never code switches in this novel, and that's an intent. Lena's in her own neighborhood. She's in her own environment. She wouldn't code switch, and she wouldn't make it easy on a white reader who doesn't understand her vernacular. And we really wanted a publisher who would not ask us. Yeah. To blunt Lena. And so, and they did. They really, to their credit, they never did. They wrote hard for this book from the start. Even before it got a lot of attention. You know, the book ultimately ended up being an NAACP Image Award nominee, but that was close to a year later, 7 months later, and then it became a bestseller this past summer. But again, it's close to a year after the book came out. And so I can't say enough about how our editor and Sourcebooks handled the way that we wanted to tell this story.
Yeah, that's the thing. When I went to this is a confession to make. When I got you guys to be on the keynote speakers at the Writers Alliance, and I was like on my Kindle, and I read the New York Times every day. And so I saw, oh, New York Times bestseller, I'll read this, because it was right when the Floyd thing happened.
Yeah.
And then I read it, and I'm like, oh my God, they're Newbery Award winners. And I don't know where that got in my mind.
Oh,
but I went and told everybody, I got these guys, they're Newbery Award winners. Of course, everyone said yes. And so here you are, but I think you guys should be Newbery Award winners.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. I mean, it's, you know, the story was, I can't understand, right? It really troubles me when people reject the story in particular because of Lena's voice. And I'll let Kim tell this when she finally does join.
I had that as a question, a backup at the end question to ask. What do you have to?
You know, the Black community is not a monolith. The white community is not a monolith. No community is a monolith. And no, I think we do diverse stories a disservice when we expect them to be the Black story, the whatever story. So I'm also Jewish, and you know, I will never forget being in various circumstances and having someone like a professor in class turn to me and say, well, what do the Jews think about that? And I'm like, well, I don't know. I'm just one. I don't know. The other people feel differently. So, I mean, what would I say to I feel like to me, in part, what I can do as a white person is say to white readers, I hope that you read Lena's story and you feel empathy for her. Maybe you're growing up in rural Iowa and the Black community is not, you don't live in a diverse community. Maybe you don't go to school with all that many Black kids. And I hope that you see her as the hero of the story. To me, she really is, although they both have heroic moments. And I hope that you find empathy for someone whose experience is not your own. And I'd say the same thing to white kids who don't see themselves in Campbell. She's, you know, Campbell has white privilege, but she does not have socioeconomic privilege. As between the two girls, Campbell is less socioeconomically stable than Lena, which is enough. Like we like to say, the book is as much about perception as it is about race, because the girls have lots of misperceptions about one another, and they're weird. Yeah. And Campbell's poor. Campbell could not buy herself dinner, a full dinner on the night of the book. The reason that she can't Uber them home is because neither she nor her father has a credit card with credit left on it that could get them home. So what I would say to white readers is, maybe this isn't you, but there's a kid out there somewhere who's going through.
And that is for that person who's looking for that.
I'm like, I know she's in Atlanta, right?
She is. I don't actually know where she is. So Kim, I'm sure you have seen this, made a video that went viral this summer.
I saw that, 7 minutes. I watched it last night.
7 minutes. I mean, it's the language is explicit, but the
very explicit.
World changing, and it has been incredibly eye-opening. I think in particular, a lot of non-Black people watch that video and their eyes get to be the size of dinner plates, because history is told through a very narrow lens, and they've never heard of Rosewood, and they've never heard of Tulsa, and the monopoly analogy is just such a powerful way to describe.
You know, Rosewood is just down the street. It's like a half an hour from here.
Oh gosh, that makes me want to come back someday when we can do this in person.
Oh yeah, it's you know, and they're doing a lot of restorative justice in our town right now. We can't have these conversations. I think we really need to be aware of this history, as she's saying, you know, about Rosewood, that it happened.
Yeah,
and it's a real travesty that it's part of Florida history, unfortunately.
And she's been an activist for as long as I've known her, for many, many years, but she has certainly getting a lot of attention and opportunity to speak on a bigger platform since the video went viral, which I'm thrilled about because the world should hear her and listen to her because I think she has a beautiful way of breaking things down. So I suspect that she is. Sometimes I call Kim these days and she's like, she doesn't answer and she'll text me and she'll be like, I'm on the phone with Parliament. I'll call you in a few minutes. And I'm like, British Parliament? Parliament, as one is.
So, what was it? She also got signed with one of the major with Hollywood as well.
Warner Brothers, yes. She has a first look deal with Warner Brothers, so she's developing content for them also.
Yes, I saw that. I'm so happy for her.
Is the book, the sequel to this, still in the works?
We have co-authored a second book together. It is not a sequel. It is similar themes, so social justice oriented. It's also one Black and one white character. It's not announced yet, although it should be any day now because it's coming out October of 2021. But so we'll talk about it hypothetically, but I'll tell you guys. It is the story of two cheerleaders who take a knee during the national anthem and the fallout from their decision to take a knee, the disparate treatment of the two girls based on their action, and like we say, sort of on its surface, I'm Not Dying With You Tonight is about race, but it's also a whole lot about perspective, and the fact that there are two girls is really important to us in that one, and this one is also sort of about how the world treats ambitious girls.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Thank you. Inspired also by real life events. They're both inspired by real life events. So obviously Colin Kaepernick is the ultimate inspiration, but there was a group, the WNBA, yes, and there was a squad of cheerleaders at Kennesaw State University here in Atlanta that took a knee and they lost their scholarships, most of them were not asked to return back for the team the following year. And actually, like, a lot of what the book is about the price that athletes pay for choosing to be activists when they're first, especially. So, you know, you can trace it all the way back to the 1968 Olympics.
Yeah, Muhammad Ali, he too had a lot of big issues with that too.
He did. He paid a huge price for his anti-war activism. You know, in the 68 Olympics, now the image of John Carlos and Tommy Smith with the Black Power fist raised on that podium is one of the most iconic images of the. But they were sent home from the Olympics in disgrace. Yes. Their medals were stripped from them. Yes. They spent years not being able to make a living at their job, and they paid a really heavy price. Interestingly, the white guy that was on the podium with them also paid a price. His name was Peter Norman. He was Australian, and he supported their action, although he did not raise the fist. But when he went home to Australia, he was also sort of in disgrace, and you know was called disruptive. When the Olympics came back to Australia in 2000, he was not invited to the opening ceremonies by the Australian government, even though he was the Australian record holder for that race. So, and there's lots. So Gwen Berry is a track and field athlete who I forget whether she kneeled or raised the fist, but was also sanctioned by the USOC. So there's a long history of like athletes speaking up. But the really fascinating part about that to me is international athletics have always been political. It's just always. Right? So this blew my mind when we were researching for the book. The President's Council on Physical Fitness in the US, which like I grew up doing the mile for the President's Council on Physical Fitness. It was a Cold War. It was a pre-Cold War invention by John F. Kennedy because the patriotic American was physically strong in order to beat the Russians, right? Beat the communists, the Iron Bloc. And it's not that we don't want athletics to be political. It's just that when athletes challenge the message of the powers that be,
they pay for it. In Brevard, I am 3 miles south of the Kennedy Space Center.
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right.
So I get to watch the shuttles go every time off my backyard. Yeah.
And are you a university professor?
No, I teach at the middle school. So I did university teaching when I was in the Virgin Islands, but since I've been here in Florida, I have just been in the public schools. That's it.
Okay, very nice. We got to visit a school near Hollywood, Florida last year. Okay. It was like it was a school.
Hi, Kim.
Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
We're excited to have you. We're fine.
I truly apologize for being late.
Oh, you're
I had
fine.
another event that I was trying to like rush out of, and I was like,
Well, I figure you're very busy with the up and coming elections and all that.
super busy. I have a march to the polls on the 19th where we're having like a huge rally with free food. We're gonna have like free food trucks and all of that stuff. Gilly, you should come by. The people.
I was just gonna say, I'm coming.
Yes. And so we're having like a huge rally to get people excited about voting. And then there's a stadium near where we're going to be that has polls, that has like 100 machines. So there's no excuse. And so we're going to march from the rally to the polls and collect people along the way and get people to just get it done and vote early.
Oh, you're gonna have early voting. That's good.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, I want to send a donation to your cause there.
The
So be
People's
sure to,
Uprising. That's the, if you look it up on Instagram, it's the People's Uprising.
okay, and I will put we might even take a little clip because Martha and I do a Tuesdays with Karen and Martha, and we'll put advertise your thing.
It's awesome. Okay. Yes, and we have a flyer up on the Instagram.
I want you all in my county sometime next year. I'm gonna see to it happens.
And I want you in my county.
I'm gonna see to it happens. Brevard needs you more, even more than Gainesville, because
we will come. First of all, I have a lot of love for Florida because I was born and raised there, and my parents still live in the Tampa area. I didn't go to UF. I got out.
Where did you live in Florida?
I grew up in Palm Harbor.
I lived there.
Did you?
I taught at Belcher Elementary.
Oh my God. My parents live a mile from Belcher Road.
Oh my gosh. You didn't go to Clearwater High, did you?
I went to Tarpon Springs.
Oh, so you played the bagpipes?
No. I was nerdy, but I wasn't in the band nerdy.
Okay.
I was yearbook nerdy. Yeah, it was yearbook nerdy. Anyway.
So,
but yes, please, if you guys want, as soon as travel is possible again, our very favorite thing to do is to come and visit schools. So
I am going to see to it that, after we finish this video, I want to talk to you, I'll get your information, whatever. And I will talk to my district to make sure sometime next year you come. If January wasn't so close, I could even bargain for that because we have literacy month, literacy week, end of January, February. I wouldn't want to jump down on you all so soon, but I definitely want to make sure that we can have just for that conversation. They need it here in that where I work. Yeah.
We would love to.
That's what we wrote this book for, so we can go and have these conversations.
Yes. I want those hard conversations so bad. Yeah.
Yeah. We have a policy, like there are no questions that are off limits for us, especially when there's kids, right? So this is a brave space. We have a brave space in our relationship to ask the hard stuff. And we want this book to be a place where kids can do that too.